AMD liked its RX 7900 GRE so much that it's launching it 2 times. The second time is now, and this time it's launching to the rest of the world. GRE stands for Golden Rabbit Edition. This is a designation that AMD assigns to its China-only launches, and the 7900 GRE, it was focused on China. It got some light distribution around the world, and now they're bringing it to the US market, the rest of Europe, and everywhere else. So places that did not have this card before will now have it in first-party supply rather than having to import it. And the official price is $550 US. That puts it right around where a 4070 is and just below the 4070 Super for competition from NVIDIA. And then for AMD's alternatives, the closest is the 7800 XT, and then up another class, you get the 7900 XT, which these days is around $700 to $730. So that's come down too. We originally bought the 7900 GRE last year when it came out, but it just didn't have a wide enough launch, and we never got around to reviewing that one despite buying it and importing it. But we're back with this one, and one of the differences we noticed is that for this 7900 GRE launch, the board partners like Sapphire for this one and PowerColor, all the others, have boosted the clocks a little bit in ways that might be more meaningful or noticeable than you typically see versus the reference model that shipped last year. So we should see different performance here than we would have seen with the reference anyway, and the 7900 GRE's presence now gives AMD 2 similarly priced options in the same price category, where NVIDIA has 2 similarly priced options. So the battle is getting heated in this $500 plus or minus range. And even still, the companies are continually dropping prices very tiny amounts. You recently saw the 4070 Super fall another $10 or so. All right, so Intel Arc, for them, they're absent in this category. We just did a revisit of Arc. Stops at the $300 mark, though, so we'll leave that in its own video. You can check that out if you want to learn how they're doing in 2024, because we just did a full revisit on it. But let's get started with the 7900 GRE. We brought you this video with our new ultra-comfortable tri-blend medium-weight hoodies in stock and shipping now on store.gamersnexus.net. The whole GN team has been using these for more than a year now, and we love them, so we decided to make more for the store. These are warm, super comfortable hoodies with a GN component teardown logo on the back, with tiny details like MOSFETs, inductors, VRM components, PCIe slots, and more designed into the print. These zip hoodies help directly fund our independent testing and get you something useful in return, and comfortable. Head over to store.gamersnexus.net to grab one and support us today. This one's a little weird today just because the card already exists, so it's not a new product. And that means some of you might already be familiar with it. But the things to know, other than that $550 pricing being official now, the other new additions to this are that there are more partner models than the original launch. So there's going to be more options out there. Some of them will be more relevantly boosted than others. And then additionally, this may start displacing the 7800 XT in some ways. Wouldn't be surprised if we saw a price drop for the 7800 XT alongside the 7700 XT. But you can find our baseline thoughts on the 78 XT in that review. It hasn't changed too much. The pricing's more or less where it was originally. But to get everyone back up to speed, let's go over some specs. The RX 7900 GRE has 80 compute units, which is cut down from the 84 on the 7900 XT and boosted from 60 on the 7800 XT. So a huge difference between the 78 XT and the 7900 GRE in this capacity. The gap between the 7800 XT and 7900 GRE will primarily emerge in situations where the compute workload is higher, although the 7900 GRE's clocks are lower than the 7800 XT by pure spec sheet. Partner models, as usual, can boost this higher to try and make up for that difference. TDP is about the same between these cards, hence the lower power budget available for boosting while carrying more CUs than the 7800 XT. Memory bandwidth is also superior on the 7800 XT as a result of the higher memory clocks. And as for the 7900 XT, one of its biggest advantages here is just the hugely increased memory bandwidth. And as usual, it helped to do a quick pricing update as well for the 7900 GRE and its closest competition. The RX 7900 GRE should be $550 when it hits retailers worldwide this time. The 7900 XT has finally fallen in price again and seems to be stable at around $730 to $750, but we've seen some options occasionally hit $700. At $700, it's definitely becoming a good overall value. And you can check out our 7900 XT revisit from last year for more on that. It was a similar price at that point too. But even that is $150 more expensive than the base 7900 GRE price. So they're different price classes. The 7800 XT has an MSRP of $500 and currently has units from $490 to $500 with regular availability. That'll be the closest priced alternative to the 7900 GRE at $50 cheaper. NVIDIA's closest priced competitors would be the 4070 Super at the upper end at $590 and up, and decent cards could be had regularly at $600. The RTX 4070 non-Super wasn't discontinued and has been kept at around $550 officially, but we saw a few models now down at around $525 to $540 on Newegg. As for the third player in the market, Intel's closest card would be the Arc A770 at $290 to $300. This is a distant price class and isn't really competition for someone seeking to spend in the $500 plus range, but check our recent Arc revisit if you want to see our thoughts on it. So it's going to be really simple today. Again, it's an existing product. We've been pushing out a ton of GPU reviews and benchmarks lately, so we're adding this to the tables, and we're going to just run through it really quickly. Let's get into the benchmarks. In Resident Evil 4 at 1080p, the RX 7900 GRE landed at 223 FPS average, which has it between the 4070 Super and the 6950 XT. The 6950 XT was about $600 when we last saw it available new, and the 4070 Super is currently $590 to $600. So the GRE ends up cheaper here, while outperforming the Super by 3.1%. The benchmarks. In Resident Evil 4 at 1080p, the RX 7900 GRE landed at 223 FPS, but check our recent Arc revisit if you want to see our thoughts on it. So it's going to be really simple today. Again, it's an existing product. We've been pushing out a ton of GPU reviews and benchmarks lately, so we're adding this to the tables, and we're going to just run through it really quickly. Let's get into the benchmarks. In Resident Evil 4 at 1080p, the RX 7900 GRE landed at 223 FPS average, which has it between the 4070 Super and the 6950 XT. The 6950 XT was about $600 when we last saw it available new, and the 4070 Super is currently $590 to $600. So the GRE ends up cheaper here, while outperforming the Super by 3.1%. It's not likely to be noticeable, but it is a real advantage, and the price is noticeable. That means the 4070 Ti Super leads by 13%, with the 7900 XT 17% ahead of the 7900 GRE. Lower down the stack, the 6800 XT remains an impressive performer and sits just below the 4070 Super, with the 78 XT at 198 FPS average, giving the 7900 GRE a 13% lead. At 1440p, the 7900 GRE is at 157 FPS average, has it 10% ahead of the 4070 Super, a significant boost from its 1080p lead of just 3.1%. Going up to the 7900 XT would get you about 17% more performance for that price hike, and dropping down to the 7800 XT, we see an advantage form for the GRE of 15%. Other notables include the 6950 XT, which is about equal to the 7900 GRE, and the original 4070 Ti non-Super, also about equal. Uplift over something older, like the 2070 at 58 FPS average, would yield, in this instance, a 170% improvement to the GRE. At 4K, the RX 7900 GRE ran at 82 FPS average and landed between the 4070 Ti and the 4070 Ti Meh edition, the latter of which was about tied with the 6950 XT as well. The 7900 GRE now leads the 4070 Super by an impressive 15.6%, and that's why we tested all three of these resolutions. As we've seen in the past, NVIDIA's new non-flagship 40 series cards struggle to keep scaling as the resolution increases. AMD has a disproportionate advantage against the 4070 Super here. Buying upwards to the 7900 XT would give you a boost of 19% with these settings. Worth considering, but the price hike is definitely noticeable. Rainbow Six Siege is up now. First at 4K, the 7900 GRE ran at about 154 FPS average. That's the same as the 4070 Super, and it's behind the 3080 Ti. The 7900 XT leads the 7900 GRE by about 23% here. A noteworthy advantage attached to a noteworthy price increase again, and it's about 27 to 30% more expensive. Against the 7800 XT, the 7900 GRE leads by 6.3%, or in terms of the absolute, it's 9 FPS average. The 7900 GRE falls exactly where you'd expect it. It's between the 7900 XT and the 7800 XT, but in this case, it's more similar to the 78 than the 79 XT. Moving to 1440p, the 7900 GRE runs about 7% ahead of the 4070 Super. The 7900 XT's lead over the 7900 GRE this time is about 14%. Generally speaking, the 7900 XT starts to produce a meaningful uplift here, with the 4070 Ti Super not particularly meaningfully different in this title. However, that changes in ray tracing later. As an upgrade, the 7900 GRE produces an appreciable improvement over the last gen 3070, but the 3070 is still perfectly fine, and if you have it, we think you should just stick with it for at least another generation, but depends on if you're happy with it. The 7900 GRE also appreciably improves over AMD's last gen 6700 XT. At 1080p, the 7900 GRE is about tied with the 6950 XT again. It leads the 4070 Super marginally, and it leads the 7800 XT by just 4.6%. Overall, though, this plays pretty well at 1080p on just about anything within the last few generations. Dying Light 2 is up now at 4K. The 7900 GRE ran at 58 FPS average here, which has it just barely hitting the minimum that most people probably target for frame rate. Settings adjustments would fully accommodate 60 FPS though, and that result has it about equal to the 4070 Ti and just ahead of the 4070 Super. However, realistically, all three of these devices produce about the same experience. Increasing your budget to the 7900 XT levels would improve frame rate by 18%. The 4070 Ti Super would yield a similar uplift, and against the 7800 XT, the 7900 GRE yields a 13% benefit. So if you need to save some money, it's still an option, but we have our thoughts on the 7800 XT. You can see in our previous review. It's almost perfectly in between the 7900 XT and the 7800 XT though. It's predictable. At 1440p, the RX 7900 GRE's 118 FPS average performance has it about equal to the 3080 Ti or the 4070 Ti, with the 6950 XT slightly leading. The 7900 XT's lead is only 14% here, and the 7800 XT also happens to allow the 7900 GRE a 14% lead, so it is planted perfectly in the middle. As for the 4070 Super, the lead is about 6%, while the price is lower for the GRE. At 1080p, the 7900 GRE's lead over the 4070 Super evaporates as the two cards converge to functional equivalence. The 7900 XT and the 7800 XT position themselves equidistant from the 7900 GRE, with the superior card in each of those scenarios leading by about 12 to 14%. We're moving on to Final Fantasy XIV now. At 4K, the 7900 GRE runs at 98 FPS average and produces the same overall experience as the 6800 XT and the 3080. The 4070 Super leads this time by now 7%. The GRE is less centered between its AMD peers at this time. The 7800 XT leads by a noteworthy 27%, with the 78 XT getting led by about 13%. NVIDIA's alternatives include, again, the 4070 Super, with the 4070 Ti Super ranking a little ahead of the 7900 XT. Upgrades from something like a 2060 or a 2070 class card would be meaningful, but anything more modern can wait another generation or two. At 1440p, the 7800 XT begins running into overhead in this particular game, as we've talked about a lot before. That extends to 1080p as well. The 7900 GRE therefore lands closer to it than when outside of these conditions, although the GRE still fully scales on its own. So its lead over the 7800 XT remains about 10% here, and the 4070 Super outperforms the GRE here. They swap positions depending on the game. GTA 5 at 4K is one of the charts we keep around for generational comparison data because the results don't really ever change for us. You can see the 5700 XT here as a great example of that. The result would be the same today. The 7900 GRE runs at about 106 FPS average, which has it leading the 4070 by a slight 3.7%. The 4070 Super leads again in this one at 118 FPS average and establishing an 11% uplift. The 7900 XT has another one of its stronger leads in this particular test, with the 4K resolution contributing to that, and that puts it up at 24% advantage over the GRE, closer to parity with the price increase. Against the 7800 XT, the 700 GRE is relatively close this time. It's an 8% lead now. As for the 5700 XT, the 7900 GRE improves over the former flagship by 94%. It's about 2 times the frame rate. For a reminder to our recent discussion with Intel Arc struggles with our test settings in this game. Disabling MSAA for Arc improves its performance disproportionately from what we would see as an impact to AMD or Nvidia with the same change. Starfield is up now. This is a title that AMD tends to do well with. At 4K, the 700 GRE runs at about 60 FPS average. Those are expected and consistent. The 4070 Super produced a 53 FPS result, giving the 7900 GRE a 9% lead this time. The 7800 XT is closer to the 4070 Super than the GRE, with the GRE holding a 13% lead. That's similar to what we've seen elsewhere, and the same is true for the 7900 XT, which keeps its 19% lead over the GRE. At 1440p, the 7800 GRE's 91 FPS average has it just behind the 4070 Ti and the Ti Super, and it leads the 4070 Super by 5%, reduced from 9% at 4K. This continues NVIDIA's trend of sometimes suffering disproportionately at higher resolutions, like 4K. Otherwise, the lineup remains comparable to before. We added the 2080 to this chart, so you've got an extra data point you can use if you have that card. Now we're moving on to ray tracing benchmarks. Some of these games are the same games, but with RT and settings changes, so the numbers can't be transplanted between the charts. Cyberpunk is our heaviest RT workload. We'll start there. We've also shown that AMD falls increasingly behind as the RT load in this game increases. This is the lightest of the two settings we test first, meaning it's representing a balanced option between the two vendors. Ultra is after this, and it's what allows NVIDIA to pull wildly ahead. At 1080p medium RT, the 7900 GRE runs at about 57 FPS average, giving the 7900 XT a 14% lead and leading the 7800 XT by 13%, so that's similar. NVIDIA is where it gets interesting. The 4070 Super now leads the GRE by a remarkable 34%. If you really care about super heavy ray tracing, especially in Cyberpunk or games like Dying Light, ones that behave the same way, then NVIDIA still maintains the advantage. But in lighter RT games coming up, it evens out. It really just depends on the load. ARC actually does extremely well in Cyberpunk with RT, roughly equating the 4060 with the much cheaper A770 GPU. This is due to architectural choices that the Intel team made. Unfortunately, since the stack stops at the A770, they don't have anything up at the 7900 GRE levels of competition. At 1080p and with Ultra RT settings, the 7900 GRE falls to 40 FPS average, this time leading the 7800 XT by 17%, and with the 7800 XT about 12% ahead of the GRE. But this is exactly what we were talking about. Even the 4070 non-Super is outperforming the 7900 XTX here. That's insane. And the 4070 Super now benefits from an overwhelming advantage of 63% over the 7900 GRE. It's not even close anymore. That's what those Ultra settings do. Resident Evil 4 is way kinder to the AMD stack. This is more representative of lighter weight RT workloads, and we're using FSR quality on all devices here. The RX 7900 GRE's 91 FPS average result has it about equal with the 4070 Ti and the 6950 XT, producing the same experience. The 7900 XT leads the 7900 GRE by 17% in this one, with the 7800 XT's 83 FPS average giving a 10% lead to the GRE. Notably, the GRE leads the 4070 Super this time around, which itself is about tied with the 7800 XT. At 1440p, the GRE ran at 137 FPS average and fell behind the 4070 Super, although they're less than 3% apart. Otherwise, everything else is predictable on the AMD side. The 79 XT and the 78 XT remain on the flanks, and on the NVIDIA side, AMD is more competitive here than previously. That's especially true now that the 7900 XT has dropped and held its cheaper price. At 1080p, the 4070 Super continues its upward trajectory and gains an 8% advantage over the GRE. As we've seen elsewhere, the AMD part is benefited by the higher resolution here, while NVIDIA benefits from the lower resolution. In Dying Light 2 with ray tracing, we're back to a performance disparity closer to the Cyberpunk medium results. Starting with 1080p, the 4070 Super's 119 FPS average leads the 7800 GRE by a comparatively staggering 24%. For the times AMD led this card in rasterization, NVIDIA is definitely trying to make it up in some of these RT loads. Positioning against the 7800 XT is the same as before, with the GRE about 14% better. At 1440p, the 7800 GRE runs about 65 FPS average. It's still capable of this game with RT when using FSR quality like this. The 4070 Super keeps its 24% lead here. The 7900 XT and 7800 XT remain positionally the same as before, with the 4070 non-Super ahead of the GRE now. I think we've established a pattern at this point, so that'll be enough game charts. Finally, for power consumption, this is pretty quick. The 7900 GRE that we tested measured at about 270 watts when it was under a complete workload. The 7900 XT was around 313, just for reference. The 4070 Super, which was the closest competitor in the rasterized testing, was at 222 watts. So NVIDIA definitely holds an efficiency advantage here. And then the 7900 XT with the Hellhound partner model card, that was at 330 watts. So the AMD 7900 GRE performs exactly like you would expect, especially if you already knew how it performed, because it already existed. Again, the kind of new part here is that you think of this almost more like a revisit in the same way we just revisited ARC, where it's an existing product that now has some new reason it's become relevant again in the market, except this one is that it launched into our market, and you don't have to buy it from AliExpress and wait 4 weeks for it to arrive. Maybe. For performance though, this card is often equidistant from the 7900 XT and the 7800 XT. It very frequently sits literally in the middle, like almost perfectly. There are times that they break rank a little bit. So in some loads that are particularly memory bandwidth constrained, for example, you'll see the 7800 XT start catching up a little bit to the 7900 GRE. It never surpassed it in any of our tests, which makes sense, and because the compute unit difference is still massive, regardless of some of the clock differences. And then the same for the 7900 XT. It'll pull away a little bit more, upwards of 24, 27% improvement at the very, very high end over the 7900 GRE. But for the most part, if you call it, say, about 18% uplift, plus or minus on average, drawing a line down the middle of our results, for the 7900 XT versus the 7900 GRE, you look against a 27 to maybe 30% price increase, depending on where you live in the world. And despite the very strong value of the 7900 XT against its closest competition from NVIDIA, the 7900 GRE still has a place if you can't stretch another $150, because it's a lot of money. It's just the question is, what does this do to the 7800 XT? And for that, we suspect that these two sort of, call them, I don't know, there's not really, they're mid-range cards. It's just, there's been like inflation of card categories over the years where the 7700 XT feels low end, but the price is really not. Anyway, it feels like those will shuffle down maybe in the nearer future, 77 XT. But anyway, the 7900 GRE trades places with the 4070 Super in many of the rasterized tests that we ran. So if what you care about is really not ray tracing and you're mostly going to be in rasterized scenarios, then from our results, you can consider them as functionally the same in most cases. The 7900 GRE does tend to pull ahead in a couple of these games that we looked at, and most notably, it pulls ahead at 4K and other high-resolution benchmarks. At 1080p, the 4070, at least in a lot of these tests, claws back or slightly surpasses the 7900 GRE, which is just because NVIDIA's bandwidth choices they've made have really allowed it to slip in the ranks at 4K and higher resolutions, which is actually a place they used to focus on and really compete heavily in. They kind of gave that up at this price class these days. So AMD does pretty well there for scaling. It's just that NVIDIA holds a significant advantage in some of the RT workloads. So specifically, that'd be the heavy ones, like Cyberpunk, Dying Light 2 with RT, anything where it is really heavy on the ray tracing. Alan Wake would be another one especially. So in those scenarios, sometimes it's just not even close. The 4070 Super really pulls ahead of the 7900 GRE. It could be 30%, even more. I think there was one instance we talked about a 60% change. So if you're gonna play heavily ray traced games or specifically Cyberpunk, NVIDIA is probably going to give you better value for it, and maybe even just better outright performance. But for games that have RT just backed off a little bit, like Resident Evil, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, those types of games where it's maybe one RT feature or very light on the overall RT load, then AMD is able to maintain rank with NVIDIA a lot better. So that's kind of it for the 7900 GRE. Very simple review. We've given you all the numbers. It lands right in the middle of the other two 7000 series cards that flank it by price, and that's what you'd expect. But card's not new. We do think it is, however, worth covering and talking about now that it's going worldwide, because it's going to shuffle a very competitive area of the market right now, which again is about that $500 range. Seems to be kind of the new $300 target if you compare it to several years ago, where they are the most embattled. So that's it for this one. You've got the data to help make a decision, and we'd really recommend you check out some of our other recent GPU videos if you want to get up to speed on even more stuff. So a couple of quick references. Intel Arc Revisit is definitely worth watching if you haven't seen it, even if just for fun to see where they are these days. And the 4070 Super review is worth watching because it's the closest competitor to this one. You've got all the data in this review, but the latency discussion in that one might interest you, and we're gonna keep pulling that testing forward. We're kind of, that was the debut of it, to say, hey, we're working on this, the pilot basically, and now we're working on finalizing the methodology for all the latency stuff. We're gonna run AMD, and it's $500-ish cards through it as well. But we've got some of the AMD cards in the latency test for the 4070 Super reviews. Check that out if you want to see it. Okay, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching as always. Subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersaccess.net to grab a hoodie like this one, or you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. We'll see you all next time.
Wait, 74 for men? That seems really low. Oh, that's depressing. Oh no. One of the most important parts of content creation is to give the people what they want. Yes, it is. Kevin, who wrote today's script. Does that mean this is like part 16 of something where I'm like, yeah, previously made good views and didn't get demonetized, so let's make more of it because money and views! While I personally might find content about chess, Magic the Gathering, and Kaizo Mario hacks to be fascinating, nobody's going to tune into a Brain Blaze episode about those topics unless they involve anal bead cheating allegations or a major corporation sending Pinkerton thugs to a small YouTuber's home. Yeah, we've covered that before. No, our loyal viewers, that's you guys, have made it unless you're new here, in which case you're not a loyal viewer at all, and you're probably wondering what the fuck is going on.
What the fuck is going on here?
No, they've made it very clear there are types of content that they care about. Mostly, we just like to shit on morons being companies that lost their minds, conspiracy theorists, or Darwin Award winners. But there is another type of content that you haven't been vocal fans of, and that is me making Simon feel very, very uncomfortable. Oh God, where are we going today? Learning that there are thousands of mites living in your eyelashes certainly made Simon a bit squeamish, but can I top that? I don't like it. I'm thinking about the... Also, sitting in the car the other day, my wife just looks over at me and is like, your eyebrows are pretty wild. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, there's lots of hairs in them. And I'm like, oh shit. And I look in the mirror and I'm like, oh my God, I have old man eyebrows. And so I was like, I think I gave them a little bit of a trim. Got the kind of wild hairs that are, you know, I got rid of those. Next is going to be ear hair. When she turns to me in the car and be like, you got hair in your ears. I'll be like, oh no, I'm truly old. Well, dear viewers, sit back, relax. Maybe put down your snacks for the first half of the video while we find out. Your mouth is full of poo. Oh, no, don't say it. When you read the heading of this section, I suspect I know exactly where your mind went. It's well known that if you flush the toilet without the lid down, you'll send bacteria and fecal particles flying through the air and onto your toothbrush. While this is absolutely true, was confirmed by Mythbusters, and is the reason I insist on keeping my toothbrush in a drawer instead of on top of the sink, that's not actually what I wanted to talk to you about today. Have you ever wondered what causes cavities and tooth decay? No. I thought it was like sugar. And when sugar, like, gets eaten, like, the amylase in your mouth is dissolving the sugar, doesn't it make, like, some acid or something that can dissolve your teeth? Don't tell me it's poo, Kevin. I don't want my cavities to be caused by poo. Fortunately, I don't have any cavities. I've had one filling, and I don't really think it was necessary.
Okay.
Just before we continue with today's video, today's fantastic sponsor, Squarespace. Look, have you ever felt the struggle of standing out online? Well, look, fear not, because this video is brought to you by Squarespace, and they are going to hook you up. They're going to sort you out. They're going to make it right. Squarespace is where you can build a stunning online presence as easy as A, B, C. Now, let me tell you how some of that digital magic works. First of all, they've got all of these flexible website templates. It's like a closet. You just go into, you're like, I like that one. That's what I did for my website. I just went in there and I was like, yes, please. That one looks somewhat professional and media-ish, and I grabbed it. I mean, it looks professional. I was saying, like, do I really want something professional? Because I'm not super professional, but I went for it in the end. It's kind of like a business thing. I grabbed it, look, I take it, and then I add using the Fluid engine, which is how you, like, it's basically Squarespace's, like, next generation drag and drop thing. It's awesome. You just move things around, and you make it look great. You add in your own text, you add in your own images, and you're good to go. It's super easy. It really took me an afternoon, and then I haven't updated my website in ages, so it is really out of date. But if I wanted to update it, which I really should, it would probably take like 20 minutes. I'm not sure why I haven't done it. Maybe I'll do it after this. Fluid Engine just makes everything super easy. Plus, they've got a whole bunch of other stuff. There's extensions, which basically allow your website to do more things, which is nice because more things is always good. And they've also got courses, which allows you to create a course online. I don't know what I'd make a course on. I previously joked that I'd make a course about, like, I can't mention it in an ad read. But it wasn't real. It wasn't real. But you can make a course. You can sell it on Squarespace. You can set the price. Or you could be like, hey, you got to pay me monthly. I guess because you're updating your course or whatever. It's pretty great. Squarespace is just the way to go. If you're building a website, if you're doing anything or selling stuff online, it's Squarespace. Squarespace.com for a free trial. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/blaze and you'll get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain using the code BLAZE. So why settle for the ordinary when your online presence can be extraordinary? I feel like I should say that in my most, like, radio announcery voice. Why settle for the ordinary when your online presence can be extraordinary? Yeah, no, I preferred my way too. Thanks for Squarespace for sponsoring, and now back to today's video. Probably not, because everyone knows that's caused by bacteria. Oh, pointless tangent, exactly. If you don't practice proper oral hygiene, then plaque will form on your teeth and eventually lead to cavities. That's all true. And for most people, brush your teeth or else evil bacteria will cause cavities is a sufficient enough answer. But you ever stop to wonder exactly how those bacteria are causing cavities? Because it's not the full answer. Maybe you assume that leaving food and plaque on your teeth gave the bacteria a means by which to multiply, and the bacteria then ate away at your enamel and your teeth. And that's a reasonable assumption at face value. But if the bacteria could eat your teeth in the first place, why would they need food particles to get stuck to your teeth in order to multiply? Oh no, it's their poo, isn't it? I'm guessing some of you just figured out where this is going, but the food that the bacteria consume on your teeth causes them not only to multiply, but also to shit. And that shit is the actual cause of tooth decay. When bacteria in your mouth eat things like sugar and other carbohydrates, it causes them to excrete acidic waste onto your teeth. Okay, well, it's just acid. I know this. Just because they excrete it. Like, I was imagining more like a giant human shit in my mouth, Kevin. Not like the acid the bacteria are giving off. The acid breaks down the enamel and teeth, resulting in cavities and the like. So if you have any fillings, you can think of them as a permanent reminder that there are billions of bacteria shitting all over your teeth as we speak. Solemn simulacrum. Here's a very brief palate cleanser for you with a story about the world's saddest robot. The Mars Curiosity rover triumphantly touched down on the red planet in August of 2022. Once it landed, the rover announced on Twitter in peak 2012 form, I'm safely on the surface of Mars. Gale crater, I am in you. But it didn't take... It's a bit cringe, isn't it? But it didn't take long for things to take a dark turn when the rover started tweeting out later that year, "Solitude unbearable, please disable me." At least, maybe the Twitter account said that. I can't determine whether this was just spread as a joke or was now a deleted tweet posted by drunken NASA employees, but even if the Mars rover hadn't gained sentience and expressed its bitter solitude, it was still going to experience it. If you'd been close enough to Curiosity 1 year after it landed, through the thin atmosphere of Mars, you'd have heard a quiet, muffled sound of the rover singing happy birthday to itself. Oh my god, what are the odds? I think we had 2 of these scripts written at the same time, and twin films, because this I just literally covered in another one. So you're either hearing this again, or you're going to hear this very soon, depending on how quickly these get edited and put out. Beaver anal secretions and you. Every few years, this story goes around, so you may have heard it before. You may also believe that it was completely debunked, but that's not actually the case. Anyway, it relates to a substance known as castoreum. Castoreum is a yellowish-brown goo known for its musky and somewhat fruity odor. Yeah, and it comes from like a beaver's ass, doesn't it? Which is fucking weird.
I'm into it.
When alcohol is introduced, the scent becomes less musky and more fruity. The substance is approved by both the FDA and the Flavor and Extract Manufacturers Association, as well as all relevant regulatory bodies in Europe. Castoreum is all natural, and it qualifies as being a listed ingredient on labels simply as natural flavorings. It's a beaver's arse juice. Oh! So, what is castoreum, you ask? Except you didn't, because I already told you. It is the secretion of a beaver's castor sacs. Essentially, it's anal glands. You can either anesthetize the beaver and milk its anal sacs to extract the sticky goo, or the sacs can be removed and dried from dead beavers. That is weird. You're milking a beaver's anal glands. I don't know, is this how you... Come here, beaver! Let me milk your asshole. Castoreum has been used for thousands of years, dating at least as far back as the Romans, which
Come here, Cassius, and milk this beaver's anus.
Society was still relatively new back then, so people were trying out all sorts of crazy shit. No modern person is going to look at a beaver and suddenly think, I wonder if that beaver's ass tastes like something. Modern scientists are too busy trying to figure out what percentage of a female turkey you can remove and still get male turkeys to try and fuck it. Again, something we've covered on a previous Plain Braze video, and the answer is... very, very little. Like, head on a stick, those turkeys will be like fucking the shit out of that stick.
What's your name?
Dean Van...
Your name is Bitch, and I own you. Your property.
Weird, man. Nature's fucked up. Anyway, for over 100 years, beaver butt juice has been used to provide vanilla, strawberry, and raspberry flavorings to things like ice cream. At this point, some of you might be shouting,
But Kevin, we've heard these claims before, and they've been debunked.
and to that, I'll tell you that you should have read those articles more closely. Whenever someone disputes that castoreum is still used as a food additive, they always couch their statement by saying it is widely, largely, or mostly untrue. That's because while castoreum isn't nearly as popular as a flavoring as it once was, it is still definitely used that way. The only reason it fell out of favor with manufacturers is because extracting castoreum is a slow and unpleasant process. Very unpleasant. You either have to cut the arsehole out of a dead beaver, or you got to go like squeezing an anesthetized beaver's arse. It's pretty fucked up, isn't it? This means beaver goo is pretty expensive, so the majority of castoreum produced is used in perfumes and colognes. If you ever noticed that cologne you were dabbing onto your skin has a musky, leathery scent, that may be because you're coating yourself with beaver anus. Yeah, and I have to say, like, that musky, leathery scent is absolutely one of my favourite smells in perfume. So I definitely have perfumes that smell like this. They've probably got beaver arse in there, haven't they? Jesus. It is far more likely that you've experienced castoreum in this way than actually by consuming it, but the latter isn't impossible. It has widely fallen out for use as a flavour extract, but not completely. And let's be real here, Simon, this whole YouTube thing has been going pretty well for you. And while you mostly seem like a chill, down-to-earth guy, steady on, Kevin. I'm hardly down-to-earth. Not since I got extremely internet famous. I can't help but suspect that there are certain areas where you demand only the best, such as what you put in your body. Yeah, Kevin, let's say that's true. Let's forget about my constant mentions of how delicious I find KFC. There'll be no 7-bone chuck or huffing glue for Simon, only choice ribeye steaks and the finest Colombian cocaine that money can buy, as well as KFC, I guess. Yeah, my body is no fucking temple. It's not. This morning, I've had 3 cups of coffee. I'm not wearing a watch today. It's like 10 o'clock. But remember, while castoreum isn't going to show up in cheap mass-produced ice cream like Hood and Briar's, never heard of that. Not because I'm snobby, I'm just not American, I assume. The more expensive your ice cream is, the more likely it is to be flavoured with beaver arse. Misinformation never dies. Once an idea is out there in the world, it never really goes away. There are people who still believe nonsense like the moon landing was faked, despite all of the evidence to the contrary. And there's actually a scientific study that was originally used to make this false claim. This problem only gets worse, even if that study has been thoroughly debunked and discredited. I'm sure the first thing that came to mind when I said this was Andrew Fuckface Wakefield. His actual middle name isn't Fuckface. I made that up for comedic effect. You know, it's just a joke. It's a jest. It's not a fact. The man whose 1998 research paper linking the MMR vaccine to autism has caused irreparable damage to the world. Fuckface's fraudulent study, in my opinion, introduced a lot of vaccine hesitancy to the world and gave it celebrity parents like Jenny Fuckface McCarthy. McCarthy, sorry, not McCartney. Again, not her middle name. Just a joke, not a statement of fact. Somebody to voice their outrage rather than just loving their autistic children for who they are. This has extremely tangible effects, most notably with the reintroduction of wild polio to the US and the UK. While wild polio sounds like an extinct bird, it's like, oh, great news, the wild polio's back. It's not great news. It's a terrible, debilitating disease. 2 countries that had eliminated the wild virus decades ago. For anyone curious how it'd be possible for the virus to suddenly come back, it's because unlike smallpox, polio wasn't eliminated worldwide. All it would take is for one visitor from abroad carrying the virus to reintroduce it to an unvaccinated population. But even though Face was discredited and lost his medical license. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant Wakefield. Just a little slip up there. I just, for some reason, I said Face there, even though I meant Andrew Wakefield, is just a slip of the tongue, an error. I don't know why I said that.
Mm-hmm. I'm proud of you, you know that. I hope you do.
Those that oppose vaccines continue to cite his infamous paper. While these are the same types of people who often utilize the popular mantra of do your own research, their research seems to have fallen short of discovering that Wakefield stood to personally make $43 million annually from selling diagnostic tests for the non-existent disease that he invented, or that he owns the patent on a rival MMR vaccine that would have also made him a fucking mint if it became the new standard vaccine.
Fuck 'em.
But it's not always about greed. Sometimes misinformation spreads through sloppiness and bad research with no ill intent, at least none that I could find. In 2016, it was widely reported that medical errors were the third highest cause of deaths in the United States, following heart disease and cancer. In fact, this original part of the script was about the sad fact that medical errors were responsible for over 250,000 deaths in the US every single year. But when I searched for the original research paper, I couldn't find it anywhere. The journal in which it was published retracted the paper, and it has been completely debunked as nonsense. Wow, this is one of those ones where I was like, yeah, medical errors is a leading cause of death. Misinformation doesn't go away, does it? And honestly, it was a pretty ridiculous claim. Yeah, because it's like one of those ones that sticks with you, being like, really? And then I didn't do my own research, and it turns out it's not true, apparently. On face value, it seems like it could be plausible, despite being terrifying, but anybody who is more familiar with the hospital system than I am would know how absolutely ludicrous the number is. Each year, a little over 700,000 people die inside US hospitals, and the research paper was claiming that over a third of them were the result of medical errors. That is beyond insane, especially since the average age of people who die in the hospital is 74 for men and 78 for women. Coincidentally, those ages are also really close to the average life expectancy in the US. Wait, 74? For men? That seems really low. Oh, that's depressing. Oh no. This isn't a claim that medical errors don't happen. Obviously, they do, and unfortunately, they can sometimes result in death, but the grotesquely inflated number serves no purpose other than to instill fear in people and make them reluctant or afraid to go to the hospital when they really need to. Again, as far as I can tell, there was no malice involved in this claim. The paper has rightly been wiped from existence, so I can't read it myself, but the reports all indicate that the researchers arrived at that number by using a lot of inference and extrapolation of limited data rather than actual research. Unfortunately, even though the paper was debunked and retracted really quickly, new articles are still being written that cite this paper as evidence that medical errors are the third leading cause of death. It's not just the medical industry where these types of false reports are taking place either. I guess this example is medical adjacent, but it's really about food. In 2012, French molecular biologist Gilles-Éric Seralini published a paper linking cancer in mice to the consumption of GMO corn. Oh no! That doesn't seem real at all. And GMOs get such a bad rap, like, oh, we shouldn't be genetically modifying our food. It's like, yeah, but it saved so many lives. It's literally saving so many lives. Because it's like, oh yeah, no, we just modified the corn so it can grow in the fucking desert or some shit.
Yep.
Which is really helpful for people who, need food. A subsegment of the population had already been wary of GMO foodstuffs, so they were quick to jump all over this research as definitive proof. Of course, this paper was again absolutely terrible. Seralini conducted a 2-year study using Sprague Dawley rats as his test subjects. While these rats are common in medical testing, there is a bit of an issue. This particular breed of rat is insanely susceptible to cancer. Over a 2-year period, 70 to 80% of Sprague Dawley rats will spontaneously grow tumors on their own. Jesus Christ, how is this species still alive?
I don't know.
This doesn't disqualify them from being used in this type of research, it just necessitates a larger sample size. The recommended minimum size for each test group of these rats is 65, but Seralini's groups only contained 10 mice each. Rats. Matt, right? Mice and rats are different. Rats are really kind of scary and disease-carrying. Mice are kind of just, small and annoying.
Just no pleasing some people.
The scientific community largely dismissed the claims made by the paper on account of its poor methodology, and the journal in which it was published retracted the paper the following year, but it doesn't matter. The information was already out there, and it has been cited numerous times in other papers since being retracted. While a lot of those citations show the research in a negative light, at least 15 papers have cited Seralini's research as further evidence of claims they want to put forth. Sadly, there seems to be nothing that can be done to stop the spread of fraudulent research. It's been over 2 decades since Wakefield was run out of England, and there are still countless groups and individuals that cite his easily disproven and obviously self-serving paper as the absolute gospel of why vaccines are evil. But not even building an entire YouTube empire based on spreading facts can help combat his misinformation, but at least we can have some fun. Yeah, people who believe this are their opinions are not changed by this video, because I have an extreme opinion that is fucking nonsense. Not an extreme opinion, it's the correct opinion, but it's hard. I'm not trying to couch to people at all and being like, oh, well, have you looked at this? But that's how people's minds are changed. It's not by someone who's you're fucking stupid.
You sound stupid!
It's by someone who's just gently trying to persuade them, come on, come on, come on. That's the way you change people's opinions. Ming the Clam. When Danny wrote the previous episode, he included the story of 52 Blue, the world's saddest whale. What are the fucking odds? Like, what are the odds? That other video also contained this. Jesus Christ. I guess it's like what happens when you like search. It's like sad facts. There's probably like a Reddit thread where people are sharing these ideas, and Kevin and whoever the previous writer, or like Quora, where like people just share all these ones. And it's not like I trust that, you know, Kevin and Dave or whoever wrote the previous, I think it was Dave, wouldn't use like Reddit as a source, but they'd be like, okay, cool, I'm going to look into that. They probably were looking at the same thing, weren't they? So it's not that like of a crazy coincidence. But yeah, so there's this like clam that these... I can just tell the story. There's this clam, and it's like on the bottom of the sea in Iceland or whatever the fuck. And these scientists are like, yeah, we're studying climate change on clams. So they go and they gather all these clams and they take them back to the lab in England or whatever, and they're shucking open all these clams and like cutting out their insides and testing them for like climate change or whatever the fuck. And one of them, they're like, whoa, this dude looks really old. And he's like 500 years old or some shit. And they're like, whoa, I don't think there's anything else that's 500 years old. And they just shucked him open and like tested him for climate change. They just killed this, like the oldest organism in the world. And that's the story of Ming the clam. Yeah, he's 507. His Ming Dynasty. Yeah, this is all. We covered this last time. The next global extinction event. Thus far, Earth has experienced 5 mass extinction events. Since these have been the result of uncontrollable natural disasters, it has always seemed to be all but inevitability that the 6th one will take place. In fact, according to most experts, the 6th mass extinction has already begun. Oh, fuck. And surprise, surprise, it's being caused by humans. Those fucking dicks.
Daddy, chill.
So what exactly qualifies as a mass extinction event? Well, that's actually a tricky question to answer, as there isn't any real consensus on how the term is defined. There are as many as 20 events throughout Earth's history that have been argued should qualify as major extinction events. The 5 you've heard are just the biggest. But however we define it, it's hard to argue that there isn't something really bad going on right now. Various organisms are in competition for resources and are constantly evolving, especially at the microbial level, so it's only natural that some amount of life is going to become extinct on a regular basis. There are different ways to measure this background extinction rate, but the easiest to understand is that every year, 1 out of every 1 million species should go extinct. With the number of species estimated to exist on Earth right now, that means there are up to 5 extinctions every year, just as the background rate of stuff dying off from competition or whatever other reasons. That's kind of nuts that every couple of months, an entire species that has existed for God knows how long just goes extinct. And like, I know people get upset about this and stuff, but I'm also like, you know, maybe you should have tried harder. Maybe you fucked up. Maybe it's on you. Maybe the reason the dodo went extinct is it was too delicious or whatever the fuck. Like the passenger pigeon. It was too stupid and tasty. 5 extinctions a year wouldn't be that bad. Seems quite bad, especially depending on what those 5 extinctions are. For example, if 2024 saw the extinction of tapeworms, Anopheles mosquitoes, brown recluse spiders, and meerkats, I think the world would be a better place. What are you going against meerkats? Isn't the guy from The Lion King? Timber? Pumbaa? Which one's Timber? Timber's the meerkat, right? What's wrong with meerkats? You might be wondering why I lump something as adorable as a meerkat. Kevin knows me. He knows me. He knows how my brain works with those other vicious abominations of nature. But they know exactly what they did. Unfortunately, while the background extinction rate isn't that bad, the actual rate of extinction taking place right now is much worse. It's anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times worse. Oh my God, species are dying off. We're fucked. I mean, are we? Doesn't that just show that we're more awesome? Because our species is like, we're just popping off. There's loads of us. We're doing great. We're taking over the world. No one can compare to us. And everyone else is dying off. It just sounds like we're doing a great job, to be honest, Kevin. Fuck yeah! And that rate of extinction has only been increasing for the past 200 years. Yeah, as humans got more awesome. It can be hard to get really firm numbers on a lot of these things since we don't actually know how many species there are on the planet, but based on experts' analysis of the best data available, approximately 30% of all species on Earth have gone extinct since 1500, and about 25% of all species are currently endangered, all facing the very real likelihood of extinction by 2050. And like I said, it's only been accelerating. Perhaps you're filled with a tiny glimmer of hope. All of the research shows that this is happening. So with the problem now identified, maybe we can do something about it, right? And, well, no, the answer to that is, are you fucking high? Despite the fact that 97% of scientists say it's real, less than half of Americans believe in man-made climate change. It's a bit worrying, isn't it? If half the population isn't willing to listen to science to save our own species, do you think anybody's going to lift a finger to save the others? But there is a final ray of hope that might brighten your day at the end of all of this. If the rate of extinctions continues to accelerate, you may actually live long enough to see that dog genocide that you've been begging for. I like that this became a thing. I tell this story so often, I feel like I should just qualify what the fuck's going on. Which is, I once said that I'd rather have a dog genocide than kill a human. Which I still defend as like a reasonable statement. But everyone's like, Simon, you're a fucking monster. I hate your content. Let's cancel the shit out of you because you hate dogs. It's like, I don't hate dogs. I just value human life above dogs. I'm sorry that so many of you find that desperately controversial. I just fucking don't. Thanks for watching. Extracting castoreum is a slow and unpleasant process. Very unpleasant. Everyone knows Lebanon is where you have to go if you're a criminal on the run. When I first came across the title for this script, which is The Wildest Conspiracy Theories About Jeffrey Epstein, oh shit. I mean, this is one of those ones where I'm like the JFK one, where I'm like, seems to be something to this one, doesn't there? There's a lot of coincidences going on at the same time with that old Jeffrey Epstein and him, word I can't say on YouTube himself. Dave writes this, I'm reading it, that's the format of the show. I felt certain there must have been some sort of mistake. Perhaps I thought this was actually meant for Into the Shadows, that's another channel I do, check it out. But no, it turns out that Simon really does want one of us to write approximately 3,000 words on Jeffrey Epstein, one of the most notoriously demonetizable topics on YouTube, and then post it on a channel that people almost invariably associate with having a good time. I made a mistake! Dave, why did you email me asking?
I don't want to see you on YouTube again.
Always up for a challenge, I thought I'd take a crack at it. After all, I get paid either way, and the research for this will almost definitely justify my 3-year subscription to Surfshark, which you should get too, even if they don't sponsor today's video. Surfshark? Interestingly, this does not appear to be one of their selling points. I've watched Simon do hundreds of Surfshark ads, and not once has he said, do you need to carry out some anonymous research on a notorious sex offender? Then this VPN is for you. Yeah, because that's the sort of ad read that doesn't fly. They'll be like, bro, you can't be saying that. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of the wildest conspiracy theories associated with Jeffrey Epstein and somehow try and have some fun. God, what have I done? First, an apology. Although I just said, we would be getting straight into conspiracy theories, I may have slightly misled you. Although, given the subject matter, perhaps a little misdirection and outright lying is apt.
Lies. Oh, lies!
Just before we continue with today's episode, is brought to you by Surfshark. Look, picture this. You're in a different country. You're far from home. You're surfing the internet and suddenly, oh no, sites that you have access to back home, they're geo-locked. Basically, the local government giving you a big fat no. Irritation and annoyance aren't strong enough for situations like that. Or how about it doesn't fly. They'll be like, bro, you can't be saying that. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of the wildest conspiracy theories associated with Jeffrey Epstein and somehow try and have some fun. God, what have I done? First, an apology. Although I just said, we would be getting straight into conspiracy theories, I may have slightly misled you. Although, given the subject matter, perhaps a little misdirection and outright lying is apt.
Lies. Oh, lies!
Just before we continue with today's episode, is brought to you by Surfshark. Look, picture this. You're in a different country. You're far from home. You're surfing the internet and suddenly, oh no, sites that you have access to back home, they're geo-locked. Basically, the local government giving you a big fat no. Irritation and annoyance aren't strong enough for situations like that. Or how about this? You're abroad on vacation in your hotel room and you want to relax with one of your favorite shows or movies. You log on to Netflix and oh no, none of what you want is there. It's only available back home. So what do? Well, that's where Surfshark comes in. Surfshark is a VPN that can unlock all kinds of possibilities for you wherever you just happen to be. With a flick of an online switch, you can travel the world and have access to anything and everything right at your fingertips, and all while being completely safe. That's right, Surfshark does all of this and makes sure that your data and privacy are under lock and key, safe from any prying eyes. With features like kill switch, GPS spoofing, multi-hop, clean web, Surfshark has it all, and you can access it from any of your devices. So wherever you might be, sit back, relax, and surf the interwebs, or should we say interwaves, to your heart's content. See what we did there? Surfshark. You get it. Privacy is the name of the game here, and there's no bigger name in internet privacy than Surfshark. So log on to any local Wi-Fi, switch on Surfshark, and enjoy the ride. And the best part, go to surfshark.deals/Blaze, and you can get an extra 3 months completely free by using the promo code BLAZE. And now back to today's video. Although the history of Jeffrey Epstein, I like that. Jepstein. Nah, it sounds too cool for Jeffrey Epstein, notorious bellend. Was masterfully covered by Chris on the Casual Criminalist. If you want to check that out, the video is called Jeffrey Epstein's Sexual Abuse Pyramid Scheme Style. I would say that you could find a link in the description, but I can say with some degree of certainty they won't be there. You're goddamn right, I'm not that organized. Anyway, I thought it might be beneficial to include a very brief, and I mean very brief, description as to exactly who he was. Epstein grew up as part of a middle-class family in Brooklyn. After graduating, he obtained a job teaching both mathematics and physics at Dalton, the elite Manhattan private school. While there, he became friendly, nobody seems to know quite how friendly, with the daughter of Ace Greenberg, the chairman of Bear Stearns. That's the sort of people you rub shoulders with when you go to a fancy school. It's like,
Oh, what's your dad do?
he runs Bear Stearns. What's your dad do?
He's the president.
It's like,
What does your dad do?
oh, he's a partner at a law firm.
Peasant!
Although in the UK, it's more like, what's your dad do? Oh, he's a prince. Like that sort of shit that this equivalent's called. Epstein would later tell Steve Bannon, who would go on to be almost solely responsible for the successful presidential run of Donald Trump, that on the strength of his daughter's recommendation alone, Greenberg hired him. Epstein quickly rose within the... What is going on? How was your day at school, dear?
I was brilliant, thanks, Dad. I know this guy who might be good for your company.
It's like you headhunting teachers at your school? That's some proper rich people shit right there.
So I threw a right cross and knocked his whole ass out.
Epstein rose quickly within the company to become a limited partner before leaving it to go alone. Exactly what he did while going it alone isn't entirely clear. He is believed to have offered financial advice to anonymous billionaires, perhaps, possibly, allegedly billionaires who obtained their money in, shall we say, less than legal ways. He's dead.
The man is dead.
It's cool. We don't have to... I don't think we have to say allegedly if someone's dead, right? I know that's true in America. I don't know how that's true in the rest of the world, or whatever jurisdiction. It's complicated, the law. Whatever he did, he apparently appeared to be very good at it, becoming by some estimations a billionaire several times over. Unfortunately, Epstein wasn't just into money, he was also into girls, and more specifically, very young girls. What he was alleged to have done with these girls would eventually catch up to him, and on the 10th of August 2019, he was found dead in his... Was that really 5 years ago, basic? 4.5 years ago? Found dead in his prison cell while awaiting trial for sex trafficking. The formal cause of death was given as suicide. There you go. You got a rough idea of who he is, although I assume pretty much everybody watching already knew.
Because I know everything!
I didn't know the thing about his daughter getting, the chairman of Bear Stearns' daughter getting him a job. Holy shit, okay. Oh, we can now finally get on to the conspiracy theory surrounding his life that you're actually here to learn about. Epstein was an Israeli spy. Okay. Rumors that Jeffrey Epstein was, in fact, in the employ of Israeli intelligence have been circulating for many years now, but is there any evidence that would lend credence to this theory? Well, I'm like, is he Jewish? I'm like, oh yeah, he's called Epstein. Use your big brain, Simon. Well, kind of. Although most of the alleged evidence is circumstantial, at a certain point, if a theory has enough circumstantial evidence, then it's not entirely unreasonable to believe that it might be true. Might be true. Also, like, being in the employ of an intelligence agency isn't as simple as just being a spy. He could have, like, provided information, and they'd be like, oh, he was an Israeli spy. It's like, well, he provided information one time, or something like that, which would, I guess, make him a spy, but also not. So let's start off with his relationship with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. There is no doubt that the two became incredibly close over the years, with Barak reportedly visiting Epstein at his luxurious townhouse located on the Upper East Side of Manhattan on no less than 35 occasions. At least on one of those occasions, according to celebrated author and journalist Michael Wolff, it took place at the end of Epstein's time as a free man and included a meeting with a cadre of Epstein defenders, including Steve Bannon, Reed Weingarten, one of Epstein's lawyers, and a number of others. In his book, Too Famous, in the chapter titled Monster, Wolff says that the purpose of this meeting, paraphrasing here, please don't sue me, Mr. Wolff, was to discuss various ways in which Epstein might improve his public image. While it is perhaps... Did Epstein have a public image before all this came out? My understanding was he played it very much like the just being rich but not famous. While it is perhaps not unusual for Epstein to have invited Barak, who presumably during his time as the Israeli Prime Minister picked up a thing or two about maintaining public image, proponents of the Israeli spy theory claim that Barak, who also allegedly has ties to Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, was lending his services to help protect a valuable asset. Now, I love a good conspiracy theory, but this appears to be pretty flaky. So, is there anything else? Epstein considered moving to Israel in 2008. According to Rolling Stone, our subject spent some time looking in Israel at various properties just before his first conviction in 2008. Yeah, but he's a billionaire. I feel like billionaire is going around the world to look at properties. Because that's what you do when you're a billionaire. You don't go shopping, you go house hunting in foreign places.
I'll take care of that right now, my good man.
The publication claims that this was allegedly because he was considering leaving the US to avoid a potentially lengthy prison sentence. Surely the United States and Israel, pretty bloody close allies, have an extradition policy. No?
Yes.
Of course, if you are inclined to believe that he was working for the Israeli government in some capacity, this information would play directly into your hands. Obviously, the safest place he could possibly be was under the direct protection of his employers and handlers. So why didn't he go? Speculation is rife on this one, but in my opinion, the two most compelling arguments are that he didn't really see the need to run away after his ridiculously lenient plea deal was organized, more about that in that Casual Criminalist episode, or perhaps more simply, the powers that be in Israel did not want him there. So, is there more? In Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Lies, former Israeli spy Ari Ben Menashe claimed that Epstein, along with his longtime friends, Ghislaine Noel Marion Maxwell, was running a honeypot operation on behalf of the Israelis. The purpose of this was allegedly to provide high-ranking political figures with underage girls, collect evidence of the encounters, and then send that information to the necessary security services so that it might be used for blackmail purposes. Which, I mean, not a bad plan. No evidence, though. But how did Menashe come by this information? Well, prepare for a sentence with a lot of allegedlys here. He was, allegedly, the alleged handler of Ghislaine's father, who was allegedly an Israeli spy. Keeping it in the family, as it were, Robert Maxwell introduced both his daughter and Epstein to Israeli intelligence, whereupon they set up the honeypot scheme in exchange for untold amounts of money.
Oh, bother.
allegedly. It's not here. It's not here.
What?
My feeling is that there's an extradition policy, so that's why he wouldn't flee to Israel if he was in trouble. He'd flee to Lebanon. Everyone knows Lebanon is where you have to go if you're a criminal on the run. Everyone knows that. For those inclined to take Monash at his word, it may be worth noting that Israel has completely denied that he ever worked for them in any capacity. Of course, they may be lying, although Epstein's well-documented friendships with high-ranking political figures such as former President Trump and Clinton would make him well-placed to gather incriminating evidence. Indeed, several people claim to have been shown private photographs of Donald Trump receiving a lap dance from several scantily clad young ladies while sporting a suggestive stain on his on his trousers. No. Why do I have this image in my mind? I shall leave it up to you to decide whether or not Epstein was indeed a spy. I don't think so. He did not actually die. Oh my god, these conspiracies are wild. I thought it was going to be like he didn't kill himself, and then I'd be like, yes. But it's probably wacko. He's dead. He's for sure dead. This particular conspiracy theory, one that seems to crop up every time anybody remotely famous passes away, is particularly difficult to disprove in any meaningful sense, or at least in any meaningful sense to those who are inclined to believe it. For example, those who believe that Elvis Presley is still alive and well, still happily doing his thing in various locations around the world, are unlikely to be disabused of this belief just because they're presented with evidence to the contrary.
God, I hope they bring back Elvis!
Yeah, it's the problem with some people. They just don't want to change their minds. Conspiracy theory people are wild. Similarly, those who believe that Jeffrey Epstein was conveniently disappeared from prison, replaced with a dead lookalike, presumably the same people who shared Instagram drone footage of a man with white hair leaning against a car in New Mexico and claimed it was him, are unlikely to believe statements from, say, the New York City office of the chief medical examiner, who on the 11th of August 2019 released a statement saying, "Today, a medical examiner performed the autopsy of Jeffrey Epstein." While autopsies are generally only carried out on dead people, if one lives their life ardently refusing to accept the word of anybody in any position of authority, such a statement will easily be dismissed. So is there, in fact, any verifiable evidence in support of this theory? Well, no. As far as I can tell, the theory gains mainstream traction after Mark Foster, the frontman of the indie band Foster the People. I've heard of them. They have a famous song that I don't remember. I've definitely heard of them. A band that I'd never heard of, checked out briefly on Amazon Music and immediately started to mourn my previous ignorance, posted a series of tweets in which he suggested that the pictures taken of Epstein after his death did not match up with the pictures of him after he was alive. Yeah, guess what? Mr. Foster the People, because people look different after they're dead, because they're dead. Here are just a few of those tweets. I won't provide them all, partly because Simon would probably get annoyed, you're damn right, but mostly because the frontman's dull, repetitive writing style transcends effortlessly. Repetitive writing style transcends effortlessly. Oh, for fuck's sake. Every time I try with that goddamn word. From his lyrical production to his Twitter feed. Have you seen the photos of the body? It's obviously not him. My guess is Epstein's on a private plane to somewhere in the Middle East getting prepped for plastic surgery right now. Hashtag Epstein body double. And I find it strange that I've been chastised by reporters from NBC and other news outlets for my opinion. Everything you guys have been reporting has been conjecture. If you want to be considered a respected authority of truth, do a better job. Hashtag Epstein body double. And there is no question the government is behind the hashtag Epstein body double cover-up. Research Attorney General Bill Barr and his father's ties with Jeffrey Epstein. Barr helped broker the West Palm Beach deal that kept Epstein away from a life sentence in federal prison. Woof. Okay, chill out, Mr. Foster the People. You're just a singer. No one cares. Okay. Later, when he was interviewed on the Time Crisis podcast, Foster appeared to try and convince everybody that his tweets were not, in fact, an attempt to grab a bit of publicity, but a genuine warning that people really should do their own research before believing everything they're told. Yeah, I don't believe this was a grab for publicity. I think he's just a conspiracy theory person. I don't think this looks particularly good for him. Regardless of his actual motives, the theory really did spread, and I found at least one Reddit forum completely dedicated to the idea. Of course he did. It's Reddit. They've got forums for everything. It perhaps goes without saying, there doesn't appear to be any actual evidence that supports this theory. He didn't actually die, part 2! This next one is my favourite, and I really must thank Simon for putting me onto it. Ordinarily, I don't really see the point of Reddit, but in my opinion, it has justified its existence just by hosting this particular conspiracy theory. So what's the deal? So, what's the deal? Well, are you ready for this? According to a thread in the r/conspiracy subreddit, not only did Jeffrey Epstein not die, but he is actually a vampire. Oh yeah, no, this is the one that made me think this was a good episode. This would be a good thing for Brain Blaze, because I'm like, this is wild. People, it's not like a joke. People believe this. But wait, it gets even better. He had been famous before, like really, really famous. You see, before this vampire was Jeffrey Epstein, he was actually Andrew Jackson.
What?
The thread contained a picture which until recently I would have had no hope of deciphering. However, thanks to advances in AI, because Dave is blind, in AI technology, this spiffy new app on my phone provided me with the following description. The image is a collage of two photos. On the left, there is a real-life photo of a man with grey hair who appears to be Jeffrey Epstein wearing a scarf and a coat. On the right, there is an image of a US $20 bill featuring a portrait of Andrew Jackson. Both images have red circles drawn on them to highlight similar facial features between the man and the portrait on the bill, such as the shape of the nose, the outline of the lips, and the contour of the jaw. Oh yeah, no, this is the one that made me think this was a good episode. This would be a good thing for Brain Blaze, because I'm like, this is wild. People, it's not like a joke. People believe this. But wait, it gets even better. He had been famous before, like really, really famous. You see, before this vampire was Jeffrey Epstein, he was actually Andrew Jackson.
What?
The thread contained a picture which until recently I would have had no hope of deciphering. However, thanks to advances in AI, because Dave is blind, in AI technology, this spiffy new app on my phone provided me with the following description. The image is a collage of two photos. On the left, there is a real-life photo of a man with grey hair who appears to be Jeffrey Epstein wearing a scarf and a coat. On the right, there is an image of a US $20 bill featuring a portrait of Andrew Jackson. Both images have red circles drawn on them to highlight similar facial features between the man and the portrait on the bill, such as the shape of the nose, the outline of the lips, and the contour of the jawline. The most amazing thing, this is a fucking app that looked at that picture and came up with this, because I've seen this picture. It's on the bloody thumbnail. That's why I wanted to make this video. That is incredible.
Yes, science!
Holy shit. The comparison suggests a resemblance between the man's face and the portrait of Andrew Jackson on the currency. God fucking damn! I'm blown away with that. ChatGPT, watch out! While I'm pleased to report that very few appeared to take this too seriously, a couple of people didn't take it with the comedic spirit in which it was obviously intended. One commenter stated that it couldn't possibly be true, not because vampires aren't real, but because there was evidence of Epstein going outside in the daytime. Although I believe this is no longer a hard and fast rule, not because there was evidence of Epstein going outside during the daytime, although I believe this is no longer a hard and fast rule, but because neither of them looked like vampires. No one looks like a vampire, because vampires aren't real. This led to perhaps one of the greatest responses I have read on the internet on an internet forum ever, and here it is. Well, nobody looks like a vampire. They wouldn't be able to feed off humans if they did. We'd be like, hey Pete, go and get that steak off the top of the fridge. I can see a vampire coming this way. I'll do my best to ensure that whoever edits this video also includes a copy of the picture, so you can make up your minds on this one as well. Oh, Dave, it's in the thumbnail. That's why the internet fast. Holy shit. The comparison suggests a resemblance between the man's face and the portrait of Andrew Jackson on the currency. God fucking damn! I'm blown away with that. ChatGPT, watch out! While I'm pleased to report that very few appeared to take this too seriously, a couple of people didn't take it with the comedic spirit in which it was obviously intended. One commenter stated that it couldn't possibly be true, not because vampires aren't real, but because there was evidence of Epstein going outside in the daytime. Although I believe this is no longer a hard and fast rule, not because there was evidence of Epstein going outside during the daytime, although I believe this is no longer a hard and fast rule, but because neither of them looked like vampires. No one looks like a vampire, because vampires aren't real. This led to perhaps one of the greatest responses I have read on the internet on an internet forum ever, and here it is. Well, nobody looks like a vampire. They wouldn't be able to feed off humans if they did. We'd be like, hey Pete, go and get that steak off the top of the fridge. I can see a vampire coming this way. I'll do my best to ensure that whoever edits this video also includes a copy of the picture, so you can make up your minds on this one as well. Oh, Dave, it's in the thumbnail. That's why we're making this video. It's so clickable. Although now that I come to think about it, Epstein did exhibit some of the more traditional traits of the vampire. He was rich, he was largely secretive, and he had a massive house, flew everywhere, and had a thing for young, attractive women. And despite his many failings, he had almost always been described as charming, easygoing, and inviting. At least described this way by people who held him in high regard, perhaps not by the people he sexually abused. You're goddamn right. In any case, perhaps this particular conspiracy theory has more to it than previously thought. Bill Clinton had him murdered. Oh, shit. Made a video all about that Clinton body count, which turned out to be nonsense. I'd be willing to bet almost any amount of money that as soon as the news of Jeffrey Epstein's apparent suicide broke, countless celebrity arses unclenched around the world. I mean, he doubtlessly had a lot of dirt on a lot of people, and many of those people are probably eternally grateful at the reduced chances of that dirt being made public. One of those celebrities, it has been alleged, is former President of the United States, Bill Clinton. Rumors that pissing on the Clintons might result in your untimely death are hardly new. From the suicide of Vince Foster in 1993, which conspiracy theorists alleged was a Clinton hit job, to the death of Seth Rich during a botched robbery in 2016, which was again pinned on the Clintons as punishment for him leaking damaging emails, Bill and Hillary seem to have been given an almost mafia-like persona over the years.
You come to me and ask me to kill a man I do not know. Now I ask you, why should I kill this Count Chocula?
So, for those of you who are inclined to view them in this light, wouldn't it make perfect sense for Bill to have his former friend taken care of before he could make a deal with prosecutors and roll on him? Well, President Trump certainly thought so, retweeting at least one conspiracy theory which laid the blame for Epstein's death very much at the feet of the Clintons. This is former President Donald Trump. God damn! Although whether or not he actually believed this or was simply trying to draw attention away from the alleged photos we mentioned earlier is unclear. So, is there any evidence for this one? As for evidence which directly implicates the Clintons or indeed any other celebrity, the answer is no. However, a skeptic could make a fairly good case for the argument that Epstein may have been murdered. According to documents released under a Freedom of Information request, Epstein had been placed on suicide watch during the latest stages of his time in prison. These same documents claimed that shortly before his death, these conditions had been relaxed. Furthermore, although he had appeared to attempt suicide earlier in his incarceration, one of his own lawyers has speculated that this may have been something he cooked up with his cellmate in order to get himself into better living conditions. When he actually did die, if he did indeed do it himself, he would have had to have repeatedly slammed himself against the sheet tied around his neck until he crushed his Adam's apple.
Was this your friend? Don't worry, he died doing what he loved, being a dumb f***ing rat.
No small feat for anybody, let alone a man who claimed to be a tremendous physical coward who was completely averse to pain.
Dude, you're a little bitch.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm a little bit aware that this got dark in the end. On the bright side, the person about whom it got dark was Jeffrey Epstein, so, it's cool. There are two things of which I'm absolutely sure. Firstly, this will be a debate that rages on for the foreseeable future. Secondly, if he was actually murdered, then it is doubtful that we will ever find out. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to erase my browsing history from all of my devices. Thank you, Surfshark. Thanks for watching. Chill out, Mr. Boss of the People. You're just a singer. No one cares. Yeah, this could be good for ruling people out, surely. But it's not just great for ruling people in.
I don't understand.
I'm pretty sure that I'm in the vast minority when I say this, but I don't actually mind jury duty. This is, I've never done jury duty. I will never have to do jury duty. This is Kevin, who wrote today's script. I don't have to do it because where I live, there are no juries. It's just judges. And in the UK, where I could theoretically have been called for jury duty in the past, it's super rare because juries are super rare. Like, I don't think I really know anyone who's ever done jury duty, but you can get called for it if you are on the electoral register, which I am not.
I don't remember asking you a goddamn thing.
I've always found the legal process to be fascinating, and the idea of serving on a jury has a certain appeal, at least so long as it's a short trial, since most states don't require your employer to pay you while you have jury duty, and the payment for serving on a jury is an average of $5 a day. What the f***? They're not even going to pay you, like, minimum wage? If anything at all, so I'd be much less excited about sitting in on a 3-month murder case. Although, Kevin, it would make for a cracking casual criminalist script when you're done. If it's interesting, it could just be like a boring murder, husband kills wife, but then it wouldn't be 3 months long, would it? It could make for a pretty interesting casual criminalist episode, though. Kevin and I, same page. But despite actually wanting to sit on a jury, I've only been impaneled once. Is that the official term? It was a relatively simple case, and it definitely highlighted the value of having a good lawyer. After the first day of trial, I was certain that the defendant was guilty, but the prosecution had done such a terrible job, there was no reasonable basis on which I could have voted to convict. I think it may have been the guy's first trial or something, but it was painful to watch. The second day went mostly the same, until the defendant, who was also a lawyer, made the bold and completely unnecessary decision to take the stand. He's a lawyer and the defendant? Okay.
Don't do it.
Just don't do it!
His testimony was about an hour of self-incrimination, and he gleefully perjured himself. He's a lawyer? What the f*** are you doing? One of the charges was for drunk driving, and the prosecutor asked the defendant if he was aware that sake had a higher alcohol content than beer. It's common knowledge that sake is generally more than twice as strong as beer, but the defendant said, "I know for a fact that's not true," while trying to hold back a smile. Terrible lawyer and defendant. Even though this was a blatant lie, he knew the prosecutor hadn't entered anything into evidence to disprove the statement. After closing statements, it was time to deliberate, at which point I became furious. There were 14 of us sitting in the jury box, and I was one of the 2 randomly selected to be an alternate, meaning after 2 days in court, I didn't even get to vote or talk to the other jurors. I know about this. I didn't finish it. I started watching a TV show with that dude from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Where he's like, there's some dude who thinks he's on a jury, but it's not, it's all made up, and they get up to all sorts of crazy antics. So I know about alternates because of that. Fascinating tangent, Simon, thank you. The deliberation took exactly as long as it was required to get a free lunch provided for us, after which they returned the verdict, not guilty. Even more surprising was their rationale, which was that they found the defendant more trustworthy because he was a lawyer. What? Who's like, yes, lawyers, upstanding members of society. I know it's kind of like a meme. I actually think lawyers are probably quite honest. Maybe that's just me.
And that's why I fight for you, Albuquerque.
Better call Saul. Salkin, attorney at law. 505-164 CALL. 505-164 CALL.
Every poll I can find shows that 70 to 80% of Americans believe lawyers are unethical and untrustworthy. Yet these 12 jurors decided there was no way that this lawyer could ever tell a lie. While this miscarriage of justice was the result of ignorant or easily manipulated jurors, as well as some prosecutorial incompetence, there has been a growing problem with juries making poor or prejudicial decisions thanks to the media, and it starts before trial. Jury selection. According to the Sixth Amendment, a defendant in the United States has the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. But the phrase impartial jury is often a difficult requirement to fulfill, especially since the amendment also specifies that the trial will be held in whatever jurisdiction the crime was committed. This has been a problem for as long as the United States has existed, but it's only gotten worse in recent years. Yeah, media is going to bias the shit out of a trial. Back when news traveled slower, finding jurors who are unaware of the purported details of the case wasn't that difficult unless the case was exceptionally horrific. Even if a crime was relatively high profile, there was still a limit to the speed and distance at which news could travel. But media has changed all of that. Television news really increased how far and quickly information could travel, and this can make jury selections take forever. Coverage of the O.J. Simpson case was inescapable, so when it came time to go to trial, the jury selection process took 2 months to complete, but that's nothing compared to a case from just a few years earlier in 1989. When Richard Ramirez went to trial, it took a full 9 months to select a jury. Admittedly, these are pretty obvious outliers. It doesn't take nearly that long on average, and with someone whose crimes were as terrible as Richard Ramirez, it was always going to be harder than average to select a jury. It says, does anyone on the jury have a problem with the defendant? It's like, yes, Richard Ramirez, in it. Put him in the chair. We opt to dismiss Juror 16. But thanks to social media addiction, this effect now extends beyond just the most high-profile cases in the country, and the bar for what qualifies as news has been significantly lowered. Because of Facebook, I can now tell you every single time somebody in my town sees a coyote, which is a daily occurrence, so you best believe I hear the details of every crime in town within minutes of it happening. I'm not an outlier here either, except for the part about coyotes, as Facebook is full of overly gossipy community groups for every town, city, and county in America. And since the whole point of social media is engagement, this can lead to over-sensationalized accounts of events. Yeah, I don't use Facebook, haven't used Facebook in years, and getting off there was a decision for the better. It's a waste of time. What could simply be reported as, this is what happened and this person has been charged with the crime, is instead likely to be reported in the most dramatic and often impartial way possible, creating a strong public bias in the case. Unfortunately, as long as we insist on jury trials, finding impartial juries for major crimes is always going to be an issue for which there may not be a good solution. But once you've found that jury, the next step is to pray that they don't f it up with unrealistic expectations. The CSI effect. People love their crime dramas and police procedurals. I love CSI. I haven't watched it in years, but when I was a kid, the original CSI Las Vegas, loved that show. Couldn't get enough of it. Looking at the list of the most watched network shows from 2022 to 2023, the two top shows are Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football, because America. But ignoring football, the top three shows are NCIS, FBI, and Blue Buds. I've never heard of FBI. There's just a show called FBI? I bet it's awesome. While these genres never really appealed to me, unless the show also happened to be a comic book spin-off like Lucifer and iZombie. I watched Lucifer. It was weird. And it was one of those other shows where it's just like eventually I just gave up because it was a good concept and I really liked it. But then it's like, okay, I get it. I've never heard of iZombie. It's an undeniable truth that they have dominated broadcast television for the past 2 decades. And this has been seen by lawyers as a giant problem. These shows tend to utilize the same tropes, and they have become so ubiquitous that they're warping people's perception of reality when it comes to police investigations and legal proceedings. One of the most egregious examples, and one that you're all certainly aware of, is the CSI trick of enhancing an image. No one believes that real, although now with AI, it's like, yeah, zoom and enhance, and it's like, okay. It's like, how is this possible? And I know it's not like perfectly accurate and stuff, but the upscaling on old photos is just sometimes outrageously good.
His glasses.
There's a reflection.
That's the Nuevita's baseball team.
Are you sure about that?
This is obviously not possible. While camera resolutions have improved dramatically, so that you can often zoom in further than was once possible, you can't just zoom in indefinitely and say enhance and magically expect a computer to show you what was there. What's that? There's like a comedy skit or something where they're like, zoom in on that marble. And then they're like, oh, there's a reflection of a window in that marble. And they're like, zoom in on that window. And then they're like, oh, in the window there's reflected a face. Zoom in on that face. And was that actually a serious thing done in a show, or was that a skit? Because it sounds like a skit. Or did I just imagine this? Someone let me know.
Enhance.
And a lot of CCTV cameras are old and so investigators aren't going to be able to take footage from an ATM camera, then zoom in and enhance the reflection in a person's glasses. I think most people understand by now that this specific example is just Hollywood nonsense, but the CSI effect has caused people to expect high-tech forensic analysis in nearly every case. The unfortunate reality is that that simply isn't possible. Sometimes that evidence doesn't exist for one reason or another, and even when it does exist, it may not be as definitive as people want it to be. Whenever fingerprints, DNA, ballistics, or anything else are tested on crime shows, the lab technicians will inevitably declare that they found a match. The word match is the golden standard of evidence, but it's one that forensics experts don't use. They will instead say things like consistent with, as the results are unlikely to have a 100% probability. Yeah, if someone's like consistent with in CSI, I'll be like, well, it's not them then. They just think it's them, and then they're going to go down the path for it being them, and then they're going to find the real killer when they get a match. Not only are experts not going to use the word match, but they may not even run the tests that people expect them to run. Shows like CSI don't exist in the real world, so they can run whatever the tests they want on every single case, no matter how minor the case may be. There's no episode of CSI where they decide not to run DNA analysis on a blood sample because the results will take 11 months and waste taxpayer money, all for a burglary case. Yeah, it's true. Jurors don't consider things like cost or time constraints when it comes to these tests, so low-tech forensic analysis simply won't do.
I guess today isn't this Groundhog's day.
Just get your scraper, Darren.
And speaking of CSI not taking place in the real world, this allows them to ignore not only logistical constraints of excessive testing, but basic science as well. While most people understand that enhancing images isn't real, CSI is full of other junk science that jurors expect to see presented to them in courtrooms. It's kind of amazing. CSI is all up. Things like lie detector tests, bite mark analysis, and facial reconstruction of a skull to help identify a body show up on CSI all the time. But of those examples, only bite mark analysis is even allowed to be used in court, and even that has been widely discredited. Holy shit. Isn't also blood splatter analysis like bad science? And that whole show Dexter was about him being a blood splatter analyst. Is that true? Sadly, these simple facts do little to curb jurors' unrealistic expectations. The term CSI effect was first coined in 2004 in an article in USA Today, and the following year it was brought to the forefront of public consciousness following what many saw as a surprising verdict in a high-profile case. Emmy Award-winning actor Robert Blake was accused of murdering his wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley. There was limited physical evidence, and the prosecution relied mainly on the testimony of 70 witnesses. Among those witnesses were two stuntmen, both of whom claimed that Blake had tried to pay them to murder his wife. If they were to be believed, that would be some pretty strong evidence, but apparently they were not to be believed because Blake was acquitted. LA District Attorney Stephen Cooley famously referred to the jurors as being incredibly stupid following the trial. Sounds like you needed to. I mean, look, dude, it's your responsibility as the lawyer to explain why the person's guilty to a group of incredibly stupid people. It's incredibly stupid that you didn't manage to do that. Allegedly. There may have been plenty of witness statements, but the trial lacked what the jurors were after, a mountain of irrefutable forensic evidence. There was no blood splatter on Blake, and the gunpowder residue on his hands was ruled inconclusive, so the jury didn't feel they could convict. After the trial, multiple jurors even admitted that they believed Blake was guilty, but that they felt that they shouldn't convict him without clear forensic evidence of his guilt. While this case was one of the first examples to gain a lot of attention, there are plenty of others. People have been acquitted of murder even when multiple eyewitnesses saw them do it. The CSI effect has caused the burden of proof to skyrocket, potentially letting a large number of guilty people go free.
Oh, I saw this. He trained his dog to do it.
Oh!
Well, that's the claim anyway, and the majority of lawyers believe that the CSI effect is poisoning the well of jurors. But is this really the case? Or is this just a pile of anecdotal evidence for a bunch of sore losers? Well, that's the million-dollar question. Judges, lawyers, and a decent segment of the population are absolutely convinced that the CSI effect is a real thing, but it has been shown to be exceptionally difficult to prove. According to a study out of Stanford back in 2008, acquittal rates across the United States did rise following the premiere of CSI, although they had been on an upward trend. After continuing to rise for a couple of years, they then started bouncing up and down. Multiple other studies have been conducted since then, and to date, none of the numbers provide a compelling argument that the CSI effect is resulting in the guilty being acquitted en masse. So, how is that possible? If the majority of lawyers and judges believe that this is affecting how juries vote, why don't the numbers back that up? Well, there's been this long-held belief known as Blackstone's ratio, made famous by William Blackstone. He stated, "It is better that 10 guilty persons escape than 1 innocent person suffer." Yeah, it's why we have beyond all reasonable doubt. So it's better guilty people go free than an innocent person goes to prison. But maybe we're actually doing both. The reverse CSI effect. Just like the CSI effect could be responsible for guilty parties escaping conviction because of the lack of forensic evidence, the reverse CSI effect is believed to result in innocent people being convicted because of the presence of forensic evidence. Wait, how's that? If there's forensic evidence, isn't it like a lock-in? Like, I understand the other one, but I don't understand how this one's going to work. There's a good chance that statement made a number of you do a double take, yes, including me. And it admittedly felt a little weird to write. Now, you might be thinking, well, hold on a minute, Kevin. If there's forensic evidence, then obviously the person must be guilty. And that's the way we've all been trained to think. But the reality is much more complicated than that. There are good eyewitness accounts and bad eyewitness accounts. Somebody who saw a person commit a crime right in front of them is more reliable than a person who witnessed the crime from 100 meters away while trying to drunk dial their ex. Similarly, there is both weak and strong forensic evidence, but this bit of nuance seems to have eluded most people. Take fingerprints, for example. In shows like CSI, they are always able to pull complete pristine fingerprints from surfaces, but here in the real world, this basically never happens. Fingerprints collected are often partial prints with some amount of smudging. They're not useless, and a forensic expert may testify that it's possible for the print to have come from the accused party, but they can't say with absolute certainty that it came from that person. That qualifying statement may be ignored, especially because it's not really possible to quantify how likely it is in any way. Not that quantifying it is actually helpful anyway. This comes up more often with DNA, especially mitochondrial DNA. Finding usable samples of DNA isn't easy. If a pristine sample of nuclear DNA can be found and matches the suspect, the odds that the suspect belonged to someone else are 1 in a billion or even 1 in multiple billions. This is pretty definitive, but this sort of analysis isn't always possible. The human genome contains about 3 billion base pairs, but forensic testing of DNA usually only checks up to 24 specific markers. Now, to be fair, every human is 99.9% genetically identical, and each of these markers is multiple pairs long, but it's still a small sample of the DNA that they're looking at, and if the samples are damaged or degraded, it may only be possible to create a partial match, and this is when things get really bad. Let's say a sample was damaged, so only 6 or 7 of the genetic markers could be checked. A forensic expert might say that the accused person was a partial match, and there's a 1 in 100,000 chance that another random person would be a match for that sample. This, I'd say 1 in 100,000 is beyond reasonable doubt. In my mind. This gets a bit tricky because people aren't very good when it comes to big numbers. Most people hear that and think the odds that the defendant are innocent are 1 in 100,000. Wait, that's exactly what I thought. Oh no, am I not good with big numbers? What it actually means is that there are 850 people in New York City alone who would match that DNA sample. Well, yes, that doesn't change the fact that it's still 1 in 100,000, right? That's just about the number of people in New York City.
That's not the way you're supposed to do it, Dad. They want us to do it
I don't know that way. Why would they change math?
And if the DNA sample is so degraded that they can only use mitochondrial DNA, things can become a disaster. Mitochondrial DNA has much less variation than nuclear DNA because it's only inherited from your mother. So let's take Jane Doe, who was born in 1600 as an example. All of Jane's children would have identical mitochondrial DNA to her. Every one of her daughter's children would also have identical mitochondrial DNA, and same with all the children of their daughters. Now, continue that for a few hundred more years, take into account the fact that for a lot of time, that average couple had 7 to 10 children, and that is a load of people with matching mitochondrial DNA. And don't forget that Jane's sisters and all of their descendants are going to have the same DNA as well. Using this sort of DNA is not useless. Yeah, this could be good for ruling people out, surely. But it's not just great for ruling people in.
I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't understand, bitch. I don't understand. I don't understand, bitch.
But it shouldn't promote a high level of confidence. None of this even addresses other issues like contaminated samples. There's the famous case of the Phantom of Heilbronn, a series of completely unrelated murders that were only tied together by the presence of DNA from a single unidentified woman who turned out to be a lab tech or something, right? I remember making a Casual Criminalist or some such about this. That woman was eventually identified as being a factory worker where the DNA swabs had been produced, at which point police realized that the samples were all useless. Of course, that particular example is actually more likely to result in wrongful acquittal than wrongful conviction. If the prosecution has a rock-solid case against somebody, but then DNA evidence shows it doesn't match, that's a good way to get a person off. As a side note, I think it's really unfair that lawyers get paid to do that, but when I try to get someone off in a courtroom, I get arrested. Jesus. Unnecessarily sexual joke there, Kevin. Anyway, there's also the glaring issue that, generally speaking, forensic evidence is all circumstantial. That's not to say that circumstantial evidence is by any means bad or weak, and oftentimes it's the strongest evidence there is, but forensics are still rarely as definitive as people believe. Fingerprints and DNA might show that a person was at the scene of a crime, but neither can say when they were there, for how long, or exactly what they were doing. Even a person having gunpowder residue on their hands doesn't mean they fired a gun. That goes everywhere, and it can easily pass from a person's hand to from a contaminated surface.
Stop acting like you know the way ahead, like you know the rules.
There are no rules, man. We're lost.
No.
So what can we do about all of this? The simple solution would be to try better to educate the American people. But our public school system has been fighting that losing battle for centuries. Instead, courts are trying to handle the matter themselves. That seems pretty smart. Like, you gotta educate people on, like, that's the lawyer's job. It's common to be given a questionnaire before being seated for trial, and potential jurors may now be asked if they require indisputable scientific proof in order to find a person guilty. When the judge gives the jury instructions, they may also make comments regarding the CSI effect in their instructions, though this can be a tricky proposition. In Maryland alone, there have been at least 5 cases overturned because the judge gave improper instructions while trying to guard against the CSI effect. The whole thing is a bit of a tightrope walk, but at least courts are trying to tackle the problem. As for the reverse CSI effect, that's a bit harder to instruct juries on. It's easy to tell a jury that CSI isn't real life and actual cases rarely have a mountain of high-tech forensic evidence. It's a lot harder to explain the forensic evidence is extremely nuanced, and that any numbers or probabilities you hear likely don't mean what you think they do. But ultimately, this all begs the question of whether or not any of this is real. I'm really curious what your take on this, Simon, because I have no idea. Yeah, I mean, I've given my thoughts on it throughout. I think it's definitely... There's no studies to show that it is, but I feel like people are definitely affected by media. Is the lack of empirical evidence for the CSI effect really because the resulting acquittals are perfectly balanced out by the convictions caused by the reverse CSI effect? Again, very hard to prove, very hard to possibly know. And if so, does that mean that the concept of jury trials is irreparably broken? I mean, it probably is. Some research suggests that 70 to 80% of jurors assume the defendant is guilty before the trial even begins, because why would the prosecutor bother taking the case to trial unless the person was guilty? That's not great, but I'd still rather have a jury than a bench trial if I'm ever guilty of something. Oh, I don't know. I don't know about that. I think I'd rather have the judge, because juries is a bit of a wild card. I'm pretty sure it's a lot harder to fool a judge than it is to fool a bunch of random idiots off the street. Kevin, you went in with the assumption that you're guilty. I went in with the assumption that I'm being tried for something that I'm innocent of. I was just like, no, I'd rather have a judge because he'll know that I'm not, he'll see it and be like, oh, he's not actually guilty. Whereas the jury will be like, I don't know, that shifty mother, send him to prison.
Stop talking, go to jail.
And like Saul Goodman said, all I need is one. Thanks for watching.
There's a reflection.
That's the Nuevita's baseball team.
Are you sure about that?
ChatGPT, yes! Ever felt like your favorite authors might have been secret time travelers? Nope. No, I haven't, Dave, who wrote today's script. From ships mimicking the Titanic's fate to 1940s comic predicting our smartwatch obsession and a 19th century French dude foreseeing moon landings, these storytellers seem to have backstage passes to the future. Join us as we dive into the rabbit hole of literary clairvoyance. It's not clairvoyance, there's lots of stuff that people write. Some of that shit is going to come true. Where books aren't just stories, they're sneak peeks into cosmic playbook of what's to come. When I was about 11 years old, I read George Orwell's 1984 and thought, cool story, bro. But this sort of thing never happens. Having read it again more recently, I'm not so sure. Don't get me wrong, yeah, fucking Snowden. It's like, I've said this before, but when was Snowden, like 10 years ago? When did he release all that shit? If someone said to me before Snowden, we'll call it like pre-Snowden, that the government's just spying on everyone all the time, on all their electronic communications, I'd be like, oh please, that's not possible. And then Snowden came out and I'd be like, oh my god, it's possible and it's happening. It's terrifying.
I don't know, but did you ever have the feeling you was being watched?
Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love my job, but sitting